sex, drugs, and political corruption. Those are the allegations swirling all around one of the most visible agitators in the Trumpian GOP. That it pales in comparison to the flagrant racism paraded out in prime time last night by the Trumpian GOP's most visible media figure, warning the following comments are extremely offensive.
This is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it. That's true.
So those comments are right in line with the chants heard in Charlottesville and an ideological underpinning of white supremacy. The comments inviting a rebuke from the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, tweeted, Tucker Carlson, replacement theory is a white supremacist tenet that the white race is in danger by a rising tide of non-whites. It is anti-Semitic, racist, and toxic. It has informed the ideology of mass shooters in El Paso, Christchurch, and Pittsburgh. Tucker must go. Joining this conversation, Katie Benner, New York Times Justice Department reporter. Also joining us, Pete Strzok, former FBI counterintelligence agent, an MSNBC contributor and Washington Post contributing columnist, our friend, former Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Donna, it all hangs together as the face of the post-Trump GOP, which I have said this to raised eyebrows, but what was underneath Trump and all of his flamboyance was every bit as toxic, every bit as corrupt, every bit as racist, and dare I say, in some ways worse than what Trump himself stood atop.
Well, it's all there for you, Nicole, in plain sight. The racism, the fear, all of those phobias, all wrapped up into one neat package by today's Republican Party. And, you know, the fear that, you know, people are going to come and they will replace all the white people who will be disappeared from the context of the United States. I mean, it is ridiculous, Nicole. And what, you know, sits out in front is that they don't even need Trump anymore to trumpet this nonsense because they've got everybody else doing it for them.
And, you know, Katie, it hangs together as well. You know, how bad was Gates's situation? It was so bad that the Trump White House refused to pardon him after pardoning all sorts of really bad actors. And I wonder if you can pull back the curtain a little bit on this latest report with your byline on it. It broke late last night, I think in the 10 o'clock hour, that the investigation, in addition to examining potential child sex trafficking and some use of campaign money, it also may now include political scandals in Texas. Talk about what we know about what you guys write is an early stage of looking at whether Gates was involved in running ghost candidates.
Sure. So what we know is that the FBI was told of a conversation between Matt Gaetz and a very well-connected lobbyist in Florida named Chris Dorworth, in which the discussion surrounded the idea of whether or not to run a candidate who could be a spoiler in a key Senate race in Florida. It was a district that Democrats hoped to be able to flip. They thought there was a chance, and that the conversation entailed perhaps running a woman as the third candidate because people would mistake the woman for the actual legitimate Democratic candidate. Now, as Mr. Dorworth pointed out, he cannot remember the conversation, and it wouldn't be illegal so long as no money changed hands and he couldn't be traced to the money. But it just shows that investigators are willing to really pull back and not just look at the sex crimes that we've already talked about, but to look beyond to see if there was other bad behavior. And it also speaks to a struggle that the Republican Party has been having. How do we legitimately win elections? We're seeing this conversation happen in Georgia around voting laws. We're seeing the conversation around Tucker Carlson's clip that you played, which is fascinating to me because if you look at the data, East Asians, South Asians, and Hispanics did support Donald Trump. So the idea of replacement theory is the sort of thing that could drive away potential non-white voters. It is a big struggle for the party, and we're seeing it play out in myriad ways.
Katie, it's so interesting that was your reaction. Of course, my first reaction was emotional, aghast and horror and shame that this was an American broadcaster saying these things. But my second was as a political analyst to say it's not even correct. I mean, Donald Trump's margins among the voters you just described were pretty good. So it's such an interesting point in that the right is turning to voter suppression laws and racism that isn't even based on facts. That isn't the articulation of a racist theory rooted in anything other than another lie.
And I think it really shows how much power Donald Trump had. We saw after 2008, Republicans really do soul searching around immigration legislation, around other things that could help appeal to non-white voters as they tried to grow the base. And now we're seeing almost a retrenchment, which could cut out potential support because, like you said, there were people who are not white who supported Donald Trump who still support Donald Trump. And so it's almost like the party has to make a decision. Do we try to embrace those people or not?
You know, Pete, I wonder if you can help us understand how an investigation, and again, people conducting these investigations would like it all to stay private. Katie and her colleagues have broken these stories, and some other news organizations have as well, and that's why we know what we know. But it seems that what the FBI is doing is simply investigating crimes, and then they start turning over rocks and perhaps find more crimes. But can you just help us understand how Mr. Gates, who became ensnared in an investigation into one of his friends and political, he's been described as a wingman to Mr. Greenberg, how that could turn into an investigation into something like what Katie reported, the ghost candidates?
Yeah, absolutely, Nicole. So investigators, when they're looking at information, they're not limited to the one allegation that they may have started looking at. So in the course of an investigation like this, allegedly, which may or may not involve Mr. Gates, but certainly investigators are going to do things like getting subpoenas and search warrants for things like email accounts, phone records, financial records. And as you start going through that data, if you see evidence of other crimes, you're allowed to pursue that. You're allowed to see it. So as an investigator, if I'm looking at some allegation about whether or not there's sex trafficking going on, perhaps I get financial data that's talking about bank records or Venmo transactions or emails. If I see in the course of reviewing that information evidence of other crime, well, I'm allowed to look at that and pursue it because, and I think that is, again, if the New York Times and other reporting is accurate, that is a very common occurrence when you get a large volume of material that frequently when you see people who are engaged in some crime, criminals tend to engage in a variety of crime. They don't always limit themselves to one illicit act. And so I think what you're seeing here is a very logical progression of good investigative work following leads where they lie, and you see this mounting evidence of very widespread criminal activity, alleged criminal activity.
Well, and just to follow up, I mean, some of what Katie's and her colleagues have reported on is the actual receipts. I mean, people always hold the press and people in the political arena to that standard, bring the receipts. They've published the receipts. I mean, based on what we've seen, and other news organizations have also reported on transactions, where would you say this investigation is? We learned yesterday that Mr. Greenberg, who is sort of the one who maybe brought attention to Mr. Gates, is nearing the point where he might make a cooperation deal with the government. Where would you think the investigation is based on what you've seen?
Well, I think you see a lot of people who are talking. There are a lot of sources out there. There are clearly people who are witnesses. There are clearly people who are defendants, many of whom have attorneys. And I think you see a lot of different sources of information. But when I read reporting that, one of the alleged folks who may have made this trip to the Bahamas had their phone confiscated and was interviewed potentially back in December, that tells me, we're four plus months from then. And so typically in any investigation where it's a complex crime, you're going to start at the bottom and try and work your way up. And so when I see a variety of people who have sources of information who are leaking or going to the press and are coming out, when I see a very critical individual, let's not forget Mr. Greenberg, I think, is facing 33 charges and a minimum of 12 years in jail. Yeah. So if he's looking to make a deal, that typically comes at a later stage. So I think this is advanced. I think that you will typically see the people who are coming next, the people who are facing charges, are at a higher level. And so that's a fairly standard practice to build up in cases like this. But it shows me that this is an advanced, fairly complex, and fairly robust investigation.
And Donna Edwards, adding to Mr. Gates's potential criminal exposure is a new investigation that we learned about this afternoon, an ethics probe. His office has just released a statement. I'll share that. Once again, the office will reiterate these allegations are blatantly false and have not been validated by a single human being willing to put their name behind them. That's Gates's reaction to news today that broke that there will be a House ethics investigation into him. Let me just share some of the reporting that I imagine and has been reported to be in that scope. Accounts of showing nude pictures of women he had allegedly or reported to have slept with to colleagues on the House floor. Donna, how skilled is the House Ethics Committee at examining this kind of conduct?
Well, I think very skilled. Having served on the Ethics Committee myself, I know a lot about how the process works. And let me just say that ordinarily, especially when there is a significant criminal investigation that is going on, that the Ethics Committee might open an investigation, but would actually step back until there's a resolution of that criminal investigation. On the other hand, there may be things that don't turn out to result in criminal liability for Matt Gaetz, but are still unethical under the House rules, and they would continue to investigate that. And, you know, they conduct rather robust investigations. Sometimes people are upset with how slow the process works, but I've seen the process work. And I think that, but they're going to step back until the FBI has had its say, the Justice Department has had its say before moving forward. And there may not be a need to move forward depending on what happens with Matt Gaetz in the end.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.